Lights, camera, lights. So in the last season, I was kind of unpleased with the options that I had for lights. So we had these ones that came with D11. They were out of scale, they looked really goofy. So I thought I could rob lights from another model. I didn't really like the detail on them. I thought they looked kind of poor. It was really super basic. So I went ahead and I made my own lights. I used brass and those little fake diamonds, and I ended up making lights that I thought were pretty realistic. And looking at them in hindsight, I still think that they look pretty good. You can see them here displayed on the model, and then you can see the little gems down in there. So I'm not going to use the gems for this one because the lights that I need to make are square, but I am still going to try to make lights from scratch. So I have an idea, and this episode is going to be a bit of an experiment on getting this done, but let's get started. So it's a square headlight, but the back of it is rounded out. So I'm using the square tubing for the frame of the headlight, but I need to kind of round the back out. So I'm going to start with this, and then we'll use a file to do the final touches. All right, got our little piece here. Just gonna trim the flashing off. I drilled a little hole in the side and inserted a piece of 1mm brass. This is how I will mount it. But before I do that, I need to fill it with some solder because I need to give this some content. So now it's time to fill this thing with solder. The reason I'm using solder instead of putty is because I want it to create a bit of a dish on the inside. So I don't want like a flat surface on the inside. I want it dished out, and I think it would just be easier to achieve that by trying to heat up some solder on the inside. So I've got it on an X-Acto blade, kind of suspended over air here so that I can heat it from the bottom and hopefully get all the stuff to melt in there, pool in correctly. Now because it's on a piece of steel, it's probably not going to be flat on the opposite side, so I'll probably still have to fill the back with putty later, but this is more to create sort of a parabolic shape to make it look more like an actual light. Looks good. I want to get a little bit more in there. So that turned out pretty well. It's got a nice little concave, parabolic lens looking appearance to it, but the back came out concave as well, which I figured was going to happen, but the detail or the smoothness of it is even better than the side that I wanted to be curved. So I think for my next one I'm going to do it face down like that and then fill the solder in. That was about 3 little pieces of solder about the size of this mounting stem that's on there that I did for that. I think it looks great. I'm going to do another one and see if it comes out even better. Alright, so my original idea of doing these face down because it got the concave back didn't really work out right on the second one, so what I ended up doing was taking and drilling into these with a drill bit that was the same size, and it ended up giving me a really cool result. It gave this nice machined parabolic lens look, and so I'm just going to go with that for the next ones. It's much easier to get a consistent result. So the next thing that I'm going to do here is, I just realized I think I need to sand these corners down a little bit more, is add the lens, and I'm going to use some glue for that. I don't rep stuff very frequently on here, but I really like this stuff. It cures crystal clear, and it's really good for gluing together plexiglass and anything where if you get a little bit of overflow glue, it's not really a big deal. So I'm just going to take and lightly put some of this stuff in here. And it's just basically going to fill it, and then hopefully when it cures it looks like a lens. Doesn't take much, just want to get it to the corners. That's it. Look at it from the side and just make sure that I have a nice good fill with it. It's going to mess with your eyes because it's so clear that it's not going to really show you if there's a spot that wasn't filled in all the way. And it dries so fast. And I think we're good. So I'm going to let that set up. I'll check in a bit. Alright, well, status update here. So a lot of the stuff is really small work that I can't get on the screen when I'm doing it just because it has to be like buried in my fingers. So I'm not going to be able to film all of it. But we've gotten the boom lights done. Let me flip these over here. It doesn't look like it, but I have the lens, that glue, cured into a lens. So the boom lights are good to go. Just a little bit of tightening up around the edges, and then obviously once they're painted, they'll look even better, but those are finished. And I'm working on the cab lights. It's kind of difficult to figure out how to mount these up. So the ones on the machine have that shroud that goes over the outside, and then the light hangs off the bottom of the shroud. For my shroud, I'm going to be using a really thin foil for it just so it doesn't look out of scale, and it's too thin for me to feel comfortable supporting the lights off of. So I had to create a way to mount the lights in there. Also, I had to realign the top of this window because it's supposed to be the same height as the top of the glass for the side window, at least on the American cab. The Euro cab has a little bit different front windshield. And then the lights installed into here, and then I will have the shroud installed on top, and it will drop down like it's supposed to and cover the rest of the lights, and I'll find a way to drill a hole and install it in that way. And then these lights are very similar to the other ones. I haven't drilled out the solder yet to create the parabolic lens, but that is in process. And then here I've just traced out, just based on photos and measuring and whatnot, I traced out the template for the shrouds, so I'll trace that onto this metal foil here. It's a thicker foil, but it's not thick enough that I feel like I can solder to it or use it to support weight very well. So this will get soldered on top of another piece on top of the cab, but just kind of showing you guys the process so far. So this will get traced onto here. That line denotes where a bend is going to make. This is the part that will sit on the side of the cab. Got the shrouds or guards cut out for the lights, so just need to bend them 90 degrees where you see these lines right here, and then that curve is what fits around the edge of the cab. It's not bad. I'd like to make a slight adjustment to the curve so it sits back just a little bit farther, but I think it'll work out good. Alright, so I'm going to take this curve, bring it back just a little bit. I'm going to use the round stone wheel for that, and then I've marked out in red the spot that the amount that I'd like to grind back here. Oh, can't forget the safety glasses. If you guys are using this sort of tool, it's a good idea to establish what's called a fulcrum. I'll zoom out here a bit so you can see what I'm talking about. think I've mentioned this previously, and sometimes what I'll do is I'll set my other vise up here, but basically creating a stable place to rest your hand. And it's always a good idea, if you can, to mount whatever you're working on. Don't try to hold what you're working on and then grind at it. If you're doing like sculpting where precise lines aren't as important, then that's okay. But if you're trying to do this, holding in your hand, because now you're trying to stabilize this hand and stabilize this hand and create an even result, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. So create a fulcrum, putting this hand here to kind of keep my fingers from slipping out, and then I'm resting my other fingers against this piece and then holding it much like I would a pen or a pencil, and just trying to create as much stability as I possibly can so I can get as close to like a mechanical sort of motion to do my grinding. Another thing to be careful with these hand pieces is this little guy right here. It's like a gear once it gets going, and if you have your finger there, it will burn and or bite. I've done it on accident before, so just make sure that that part is towards the inside of your grip when you're working. Save you some headache and some finger ache. Alright, so I've finished the lights and I think they're acceptable. So let me see if I get this guy to focus here. You can see I have created the hood and the lights. I'll show it to you in individual pieces. So these are the ones that we saw earlier, the lights that I'm using for the boom. And I used that glue to fill it in to create the lens. Let's see if I get the focus correct here. So it creates a bit of a lens, and then you have the cab mounted stuff. So here is the shroud that will fit around the light itself. A little bit of a mounting point on there. And then the cab lights are kind of gumpy looking, but they're meant to be hidden by the shroud. I couldn't figure out how to attach these without having to attach it to the shroud itself, because it's such thin metal. So on the full scale model, the light actually attaches to the bottom of the shroud. I wasn't able to get very good pictures of this, and I couldn't even find the part by itself to see how it goes. So I had to try to figure it out based off of the photos. My same process as usual, and then just kind of make it up from there. And you can see on here, if I can get it to focus, we have these holes right here where both of the parts are mounted. So these parts are going to actually get glued in place before I do the painting. And the reason why is because I don't want to have to try to mask these spots off and then paint and then glue these onto there. It's going to be more trouble than it's worth, especially with an airbrush. I'll have the ability to get in here and paint from the underside, and also this is all going to be black. The whole front of the cab is going to be black. The lights and the shrouds are going to be black as well, so all I'll have to do is mask up the lenses on the light. And I may even be able to, I'm sorry, I keep sniffling in the microphone, I'm sure that's annoying. I may even be able to take that out and install this part first. Oh, looking at it upside down. Install this part first and then install the light after it. Now that we've got the cab lights done, we're down to the nitty gritty, itty bitty little details to finish off the body here. The little details are where you really make the model stand out. So I'm going to go over all the last little bits that we have to do here. I usually don't like to forecast what's going on just because it's a bit redundant, but I think this one is warranted. So starting from the front to back, we have to install that little step that goes down there. We have to build and install the mirror that's going to go right there. There's a tall rail that connects from here to here that I have to build, and it's actually kind of a complex rail because of the way it's mounted. You need to drill a hole right here because there's something of a fill cap that sits right there. Need to create the exhaust for this, which this actually has kind of a unique exhaust. go over that later. I'm not doing the counterweight hooks that go on top of the counterweight. I've looked through a lot of photos and not all of these have them. About 90% of the photos that I've seen have the hook on there, but I'm just not a fan of the way they look. I think they look a little too busy. So there is a panel that goes on the top that I'm going to make out of brass and install that. And it's got a little bit of a vent in the rear corner of it. And then I'm going to drill a bunch of little holes in here to install simulated bolts. That's basically just going to be brass rod, but it will look better than just a flush, smooth deck. I also need to install a rail to go over on this side. And then I need to make the cab glass as well. I had mentioned earlier in the series that I'm going to fit the glass into the holes, so the glass currently just slides in behind there. I really don't like the way that looks because it leaves this huge ledge. It just looks really out of scale, so what I'm going to do is cut out the individual pieces of plexiglass and then slide them into the spaces here, which is rather labor intensive but makes for a pretty good looking result. Oh, and one final sort of pain in the butt thing that we get to do, which I've never actually made these before, but I'm going to try to make windshield wipers for this. So this has two wipers. It's got one that is installed into the top here and sweeps the top piece of glass, and then it's got one that installs down into the little chin here, and that sweeps the lower piece of glass. Now it's time to make the bigger of the grab rails. This is the one that goes on the right side of the machine and goes along the steps. It is a little bit more of a complex piece. It has a base plate, then a thicker tube, and a thinner rail drops down into that tube, and then it has like a foundation piece, like a support bracket that goes from the base plate to the vertical tube here. I'm just gonna flux this up and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Two little pieces that create a V. I'm doing it as one piece here because I can't get this thin material cut into two small pieces and make it work for this. So just trying to position them here. So I'm just going with like a V shape, and then I'll trim it into place or trim it into shape here in a second. I just need it to have a longer side on it so that I can hold it all together. All right, so it's time to try to solder this up. Right, and here it is in place with these little guys cut. Just kind of give you an idea of what it looks like. And this has to get bent all the way down to here. It kind of goes out at a diagonal. And that's how I've got it mounted in. Alright, I'm going to take a little bit of a risk here, and hopefully the reward is going to be a little bit more detailed, but I'm going to punch two holes in the larger tube here so that I can simulate the bolts that retain the handrail. Just a little bit more detail, so hopefully it comes out right. Drilling into the side of a tube is never easy. Alright, so the base of this is done. Alright, the rail is done. Let me show you what we got here. Got the base of it done. curls down and around, and then there's a little flat piece on there. So that will get glued in place. This will go on after the model is painted, so I'm actually going to have to mask this spot up where that attaches down there. And then the top will obviously get glued in place. Alright, so now that we have the big tall rail done, it's time to do the little rail that sits behind the cab. It's a little grab rail. The one that came with the model was pretty thick. It was about 1.2 mil in diameter. It's a little bigger than I want. So what I'm going to do is use this 1.19 mil tubing, drop it in, and then I'll be able to install the 0.8 mil tubing in there, or a rod in there, which is the same one that I used for the rail that's over here, and that will be the new grab rail that goes behind the cab. Sometimes I just get like in this go mode where I'm working on stuff and I'm glue things in without even thinking about it. I wasn't quite ready to glue that in, but it's not a big deal. It's not really in the way. If it was the other one, we would have to take that guy out. Alright, so all the rails are done. Now it's time to create, and I've kind of been excited about this part, the little mirror that attaches over here. I don't remember why I decided to drill this 1 mil hole in here early on in the project. I guess I had different ideas of how I was going to do the mirror, but I'll still be able to use this. Right, use something that I don't really use frequently. This is a soldering iron. I'm more of a torch guy, but I've been finding that I really need to improve my soldering iron skills because I think I could use it for smaller stuff. So I'm going to try tinning up a piece of brass here and then soldering a joint together. before I cut it, just make sure that I've got it as smooth as I want it, because once I cut it, it's going to be really tricky to get a good grip on it. All right. Alright, so this little thing here that looks like Popeye's corncob pipe is the beginning of the mirror. This is the part that will mount it. Just let me get it attached here and I'll bring it back into the screen. Oh, where is the screen? Oh, I lost it. There we go. Alright, so now that it's attached, you can see how it goes on there. And then I will mount the mirror to that. So here's our little donor mirror here. I'll zoom out a little bit. Oh, messed up the focus. Alright, so I need to start cleaning this thing up. So what I'm going to do is cut away all the simulated post here, and then it will just be the mirror back panel itself. And then the other side, I need to smooth it out a bit. It's got this little dimple in the middle from where it was injection molded. So I'm going to take and sand the paint off of here and then hit it with some putty to create a little bit more of a rounded face. Took an X-Acto blade and cut all the back and everything off of this mirror, and then I punched a 1mm hole in it, and I've got it on this just so that I can have a better grip of it while I'm applying the putty to the top. And then once the putty cures, I'll pop this out of the back and install a length of tubing. Alright, so the mirror came out really good. So here is the lens portion of it. I used some putty to kind of create a rounded surface that I will paint later. And then we have the post and a little tube going in the back. And then we got this part right here, which is the brass rod with the tube attached to it, and the little square of styrene around there to create the plate. And then this inserts like that, and gravity is kind of working against me right here, but eventually this will get glued together and voila, there will be a mirror attached to the side of the model. Alright, so the last component that we're going to build here for this episode is the exhaust. The 345 has a pretty notorious exhaust. It's a lot bigger than that of comparable models, and the reason why is because the part that you see from the outside isn't the part coming off of the engine. So for this model, Caterpillar attached a exhaust to the engine cover, and then the engine has its exhaust that comes off the manifold and goes up into this cover. Now, I'm not entirely sure how it attaches in there, whether it just sits up inside and there's a free space, or if there's a gasket that it sits down into. I'd imagine there's probably some sort of a gasket, but it makes for a pretty large exterior exhaust. So what I'm going to do for this one is it's going to have a smaller one on the inside, and then I have this larger one that slips on the outside. Now in the Dozer episode, or the Dozer series, I showed you guys how to build an exhaust. So I'm going to use the same method here. I'm doing a smaller tube inside this one, just a little bit of it sticks out right here, and that allows it to kind of seat on the inside of the angle. It will all go together like this. So the first thing I need to do is get this all covered with some flux, and then let's solder it up. I got a little piece of wood under here so I don't melt my mat. Not that I've ever done that before or anything. I'm pretty careful when it comes to working with heat around my mat, and I've been pretty good about not burning my mat in the past. Alright, the exhaust pipe is done. So I drilled a hole in the wood that's in here. And let's line that up. That's the flange. And this drops down in there, like so. And we have an exhaust. Need to do a little bit, not a little bit, I need to do some definite cleanup around the solder joint. But yeah, so let's take a look at pretty much all the stuff that we built here. Install some of it. I'm not going to install the light because it's kind of flippy floppy, but yeah, man, we got rails, we got exhaust. So in the next episode, I hope to finish all the last little bits on here. I've still got a lot of stuff to do on this, and every time I look at this, I swear I find more things that I need to do. But as far as the body is concerned, we already built the step. I just need to make sure that step is gonna fit. Finished the mirror, so I need to drill the hole for whatever this filler is right here, and then punch in all the little holes for the little bolts that go on top, and then I need to make this little plate that goes up there. And for the body, I do believe that is it. And then the next steps after that is to complete the cab, which is going to involve cutting out the cab glass. I also need to make something that I've never made before, and that's windshield wipers, which is going to be challenging because those are really small. And need to make the boom pin as well as the little hydraulic bank, which is pretty much done. I just need to do all the hoses and stuff for it. And I think that is, oh, I need to do a mirror for the cab as well. I think that's it. I hope so. We're getting there, guys. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Adios.